Good morning. Today's video is all about brain fog. And I really do believe that the universe is conspiring against me this morning to post this video live. So never fear, I can do a video and I'll go ahead and get that posted in the group. And yeah, I'm looking forward to talking to you today about brain fog. And I was kind of laughing this morning. There's a lot of things that are going on for me. And just a little bit of some moving chaos. And, there's this book like Who Moved My Cheese? And I'm in this cycle of where is my cheese? Like, everything's being packed in boxes and coordinating, shutting down my life on this side and turning my life on in Austin. So there's a lot of moving parts with transporting my car, coordinating the pod system, doing some things, last minute things, doctor's appointments and car service and other things that I want to get done here before I have to establish new providers in the new cities. So there's a lot of where's my cheese? And I think it's only fitting to be doing a brain fog video right in the middle of all of this chaos. But regardless, we're going to do it. So let's talk about brain fog. And just a reminder that true love does really begin with you. And that means loving yourself, having self-love for yourself, learning some new life skills, how to set boundaries, how to escalate, how to communicate, and also taking care of yourself. And when we're taking care of ourselves and we're really setting boundaries and speaking our truth, we really walk in a different presence in the world. And so true love really does begin with you. And watch all the way to the end. I always give a question so that you can ponder and think about this video and how to apply it in your life. So yeah, we're going to talk about brain fog. And what is brain fog? I think we are all very aware of when we're driving in fog, and I think that's the biggest analogy is when we're driving a car and it's really foggy out and there's low visibility. We're unsure of ourselves. We have to slow down. We're trying to get our bearings and we're just driving our car, this, big piece of metal that weighs 3,000 pounds or whatever your car weighs. It's going through the roadway and we hit fog and we're uncertain and unsure. And that's the same thing that's happening with our brain, that we are confused. We have low cognitive ability. We may have disorganized thinking. We are hard to focus, hard to recall memory, memory details with significant detail. But when we're in other situations, we can recall those details. And so it's kind of curious, like when it happens. And, the other thing that happens with brain fog is that we aren't getting things done. Like there just is this list, and for whatever reason, we just can't get through the list like we used to. And we're having a hard time forming our words, and different words come out too, like Brad and Angelina, and having those words go together. Like it's just really hard. It's really hard to think on the spot. And if you've been watching me in this group, this is something that I really struggle with. And, when I am speaking with other people behind the scenes without a camera, there's a completely different Denise. And I really do believe it's a stress factor. And it's just been really hard to navigate this part of my life. And, I consider myself to be quite intelligent and ability to talk with people, and I've given presentations with microphones in front of 500, 600 people in a conference. And yet, I've been really struggling with brain fog, and I really wish that I could have that wonder twin powers of my old professional self. If I could do that, to have my powers back then, that would be awesome, but that's not the case. And I think if you watched my YouTube video or some other things, it kind of comes and goes, and it's difficult to navigate. And yeah, you have a front row seat to what happens with somebody who has brain fog after divorce, after separation, and healing from narcissistic abuse, because it is a real phenomena. And, if that's something that you're struggling with, my heart goes out to you, and I understand. And I'm walking alongside you, and we can figure this out together. And, again, when you're under stress with brain fog, it's hard to have memory recall. And that's been really significant for me as well, and unclear thinking. And when we think about brain fog, there's a lot of contributing factors that are going on behind the scenes. And that's what makes it such a multi-dimensional health concern, because there's so many things feeding into it. It's not just one system. It's not just one health factor that is causing the brain fog. There are multiple entities. So let's talk about those today. So one of them can be relational stress. And when we're in relational stress, like when we're going through a divorce or separation or healing from narcissistic abuse or coming from a narcissistically abusive relationship, there's a lot of relational stress. There's a lot of things that aren't talked about. There are a lot of things that are just up in the air. There is antagonism. There's trying to get things resolved. And it just creates this big stress ball that's in your life. And, whether that's family or whether that's a romantic partner or whether that's work or whether that's a friend situation, those are all relationships. And that's where, when we're in those type of relationships, you're thinking, okay, there is going to be some stress at some point because everything can't be perfect. But also at the same time, these relationships are supposed to pour into us, and we're supposed to pour into the other person. And sometimes when we're in these type of relational stress situations and chronic long-term situations, then the opposite happens. We don't have this person that's lifting us up, that's safe, that's a peaceful relationship, that there's just all this stress going on, and it's just really antagonistic and not peaceful at all. And so our body reacts to that. We have increased cortisol. We're not able to sleep. We're probably not eating well. We might have gastrointestinal issues. So there's a lot that happens in relational stress that can really increase brain fog. So that's like a number one thing there is relational stress. The other thing is trauma responses. And, when we navigate life, we have a certain dynamic in which our body and our brain, how we navigate stress and how we navigate triggers in our life. And you've heard of fight, flight, freeze, or fawn. So that's another whole dynamic, is how you navigate the world with your trauma responses. And, the fight, flight, freeze, or fawn, the 4 Fs I'm going to refer to from now on, that is the activation of the sympathetic nervous system. So that's when we're up against a stressful situation or a trigger, and our body floods in cortisol. And we have 4 ways in which we deal with traumatic and triggering situations. And the first one is we're going to fight. Like we're going to, get ready for battle. And so there's just this release of adrenaline that goes into our body, and we're going to fight. We're going to fight the aggressor. The second one is freeze. So we go into a freeze response where we just, we're bracing for impact, or we don't even know what's happening. So we just really freeze in place and we don't know what to do. We're a statue in the middle of all this, while behind the scenes, our body is just trying to maintain its regular homeostasis, but we've got all this stress and the trigger is happening. So we've talked about fight and freeze, and then we've got flight, where we're running away. If we're in a situation or we're triggered and we don't know how to deal with it and we can't deal with it, we just, remove ourselves from the situation. And the one thing that a lot of people don't talk about is the fawn response. And that is a term that came from Pete Walker. And I think that needs to have more education around the fawn response, because that can really, when you take a look at it from codependency lens, or friend and befriend, or being that baby deer in the woods, you've got a predator coming towards you, and you're just going to make yourself small, and you're going to try to friend the enemy just so that you can get away. And I think that's what really happens to a lot of people in these, when you're coming out of divorce or separated or coming from narcissistic abuse. I think that's a real component to codependency, is, not really speaking up, not setting boundaries, that type of thing. So, with the 4Fs, our body is really in this trauma response. And there's just so much adrenaline and trying to figure out what to do that it really impacts our brain chemistry and our nervous system. And it really kind of takes out, all this mental processing and clarity that we have. We've just got all this stress coming towards us, or a triggering event. And so that can really impede the processing of our brain. The other thing is just, thinking about our brain and our body and our nervous system. When we are in a trauma response, all of those things are impacted. All of those systems are impacted. And our brain is looping. We've got hormones and chemicals that are in our body, and we're on high alert. And just all of that energy is going out to be on high alert, that it really takes resources away from our brain to be able to react and process and make clear decisions. And there's a really interesting study that was done by the University of New Orleans and also Stanford University around PTSD. And what they did was they actually studied the hippocampus. That's a part of the brain that handles short-term memory and also processing speed. And they did this analysis and study of people who had PTSD. And what they found is that folks that were struggling with PTSD had smaller hippocampus size. So that really kind of proves the whole process in our brain, that all of our cognitive processing with short-term memory and the ability to process info in a quicker way, that all of that is hampered if you have PTSD, and that's just pure brain size and what's going on. So, anybody who's struggling, and I really do believe there's more of us walking around with PTSD than people report. And, that can be a really big factor, that for whatever reason, the hippocampus part of our brain has shrunk, and we don't have all of the different skills and abilities in and under stress because of this biological sizing piece of the brain. And I just find that that's really fascinating, that the brain would actually morph under stress and repeated stress. And, if you think about, narcissistic abuse, and you talk about divorce, long-term divorce, that you've had things that have been going on for a long time, situations, resolution on different events and matters, and that sort of thing. I keep saying thing. I don't know what it is. Thing. Everything's a thing. So anyway, the thing. And, like PTSD, I was having a conversation last night with somebody about PTSD. And, sometimes PTSD is one event, one traumatic event. And a lot of times it's associated with wartime, with veterans and soldiers who have been over in war. and that's often associated with PTSD. But the other thing is, and I hope that there's more education around this, but there are people who have navigated difficult childhoods and then have had that same relational dynamic that's happened in romantic partners or friendships or work environments, which only creates that stacking of different events, which can actually increase all of these symptoms of brain fog. So if you've lived a life of, childhood, you had a childhood trauma, and then you got married to your first husband or wife, and there was similar trauma dynamics that are going on in relation to other people, then that's another layer on your pancake stack of PTSD. And then you add in a second marriage or a work environment or a friend environment. And these things are all very similar because it's in relationship with others. And your pancake gets pretty high. And so I believe that really causes greater impact in the brain processing and in the brain fog. There's no studies on that, but I have lived that in my life. I've had multiple marriages. I've had 2 marriages that had very similar dynamics, and also childhood trauma that was very similar to that. So, I know for me that has, in healing and peeling back those layers, that has impacted me with brain fog. Another factor is just stress overall. When we're under stress, we have the stress hormone cortisol that is pumping through our body. And with elevated levels of cortisol, that really impacts our levels of anxiety, the tension that's in our body. If we do research on cortisol, it can be attributed, when we have that much more cortisol in our body, we have weight gain. We have a reduced immune system, so we're getting sicker more. We have more anxiety. We have less sleep. We have more tension in our body. We have more autoimmune diseases, more health conditions, diabetes, heart issues, even Alzheimer's and dementia. There are other health factors that if we have chronic stress in our life, that impacts our cortisol levels, which then impacts our brain. So that's another whole factor to consider when it comes into brain fog. Another one is menopause for us ladies in the 40 plus, because a lot of times we're going through perimenopause a lot earlier than what our doctors believe to be true. And I remember going into my doctor, it was around age 39, and I was starting to have more, not really full on hot flashes, but, body, elevated heart rate and elevated temperatures, not to having any hot flashes, but again, kind of some of the same brain fog impacts were happening back then, as well as just more anxiety. And I went and talked to my doctor, and she's like, no, you're not perimenopause. Well, sure enough, looking back, that was a factor and menopause. And that really does impact us ladies in the 40 plus category. And then add on the stress of a divorce or trauma healing or narcissistic abuse healing, or, trying to figure out the whole divorce and separation and legal and the house and money and the kids and all of that and the change in your life. That's just like a whole stress bomb waiting to go off. Again, there are body changes that happen with all of these different elements, these health issues that can impact brain fog. And the other thing that's really surprising about brain fog is that we really can help ourselves by having better nutrition and by having better hydration and having better fat intake. And all 3 of those things go together. I mean, that's a lifestyle thing. We can eat better. Like if our nutrition is off and we're only eating carbohydrates, we're not getting sufficient protein, we're not getting sufficient fat, and we're not getting our leafy green vegetables and we're not getting enough water into our system. And all of that can negatively impact our mind and our body by having more brain fog. And that's a simple thing about nutrition. And here's another thing, that's something that I've really been pondering on in my life. And as a nutritional therapist and a personal trainer and a life coach, I am really curious about long-term fat intake. And if we think back to when our parents, I'm 56 and my dad's 80 and my mom's 77. And if we think back to the health industry and health advice that was given to our parents, they were all about, eat a low-fat diet. And now looking at 20 and 30 years later, after that eat a low-fat diet, we're having higher levels of Alzheimer's and dementia and memory problems. And I really, truly do believe that it's all based on fat intake. Like, our body needs healthy fats. We need omega-3s. We need to be eating at least 2 to 3 servings of fat, of fish per week. And we need to be eating healthy nuts, and we need to be eating a Mediterranean diet that's based on having healthy fat in our diet. And I'm just curious if maybe that might be why we have an epidemic of seniors who are having dementia and Alzheimer's. And that was all based on health advice 20 to 30 years ago. And I think that's curious just about, so eating a nutritious, balanced meal that has protein, the correct fats, and vegetables and fruits, and also carbohydrates, and we eat in moderation, and having sufficient water can really help our brain. And there actually is another study that was done on Alzheimer's patients and about water intake. And when they were fully hydrated, they had better processing speed and they had less brain fog markers just based on drinking water. So having, those 7 to 8 glasses of water today can really help you in your brain processing brain processing speed, and just help you overall with your brain. Another one, that I talk to a lot of ladies about is chronic fatigue. And, just as well as our body being fatigued with depression or anxiety going through divorce, separation, or healing from narcissistic abuse, that our brain and our body are tired. They've just been tired over time. And again, that does go feed back into our brain processing speed and the brain fog. It does, if our body and our mind are tired and we've got, chronic stress and we're tired, of course it makes sense that our brain's going to slow down so that we're going to rest. Our body and our brain are going to rest. And again, there's a lot to be said about depression. Being lonely and depressed can really, again, slow down our body and help us and make us feel fatigued and sleepless and not quite like ourselves. And another one is sleeplessness, the amount of sleep that we get per night. If we're off onto our devices and we only get like 4 or 5 hours of sleep, that's really going to impact our brain as well. And again, sleeplessness and depression go hand in hand. So we're not doing ourselves any favors by staying in those health issues with sleeplessness and not eating right, and then not feeling well in divorce, separation, or narcissistic abuse. And so I think it's really important to have a lens of compassion for ourselves and others going through this. And, I have really had some connecting conversations with different people in different stages of their divorce or healing cycle from narcissistic abuse or in separation. And, it really is, brain fog is very debilitating. And, it impacts how you feel about yourself, your confidence level. It impacts the way that you present, when you have brain fog. I know for me, I kind of stress out. I was stressing out about the brain fog video coming into this. And, am I going to say it all right? And where am I going to trip up? And that's another whole thing. If we're looking for those things, our brain, if we're looking for that time that when we're going to trip up with our words, and then we get down on ourselves because that happens, that creates a whole groove in our brain as well. And then our brain is not going to be full force ahead, having just processing, going from point A to B. You don't have a straight line in all of that. And we trip ourselves up when we're saying, oh, I didn't do this right, and then chastising ourselves for that. And so I just kind of laugh it off now as much as possible, or sometimes I have to just put a pause in place and collect my thoughts. And the people who are around me, when I'm safe, there's a free flow of information. And that's been something that's been very eye-opening for me as I look back on the last 3 or 4 months, that there were some, I was under a great deal of stress in a program that I was on to help me with my business, my coaching business. And I can definitely see that there was some great brain fog and cognitive deficits that were happening, and it was so impactful to even shut down my regular self and how I communicate, and was forgetting things and didn't have the words. And I think that's very fascinating to now just start to understand the last 3 or 4 months with some protocols and how I was trying to advance my coaching business. So, it's a very tricky situation. There's a lot of compounding factors. We talked about, starting off, we talked about if you have PTSD or not. We talked about these different things that can impact, excuse me. We have these different health situations that can really negatively impact our brain in brain fog. And that includes relational stress. Who's in our inner circle? Who are we in relationship with? We also have our wired trauma responses, how we deal with triggers, how we deal with traumatic situations. And in that trauma response, our body and our mind and our brain and our nervous system all act in a certain way as well. And so that's something that we have to take into consideration when we're navigating different situations. The other thing that impacts us is PTSD, whether we have a history of that or how our brain's been wired and how we're navigating this life just as we are right now. We also have, and sometimes I do have little cheater notes. That does help me to stay on path, because when I get talking, I don't remember where I'm at. And so that can impact videos like this. And the other things that is hormonal levels, the hormonal levels for us women. And I'm sure that would be impactful to men as well when they get into midlife as well, their testosterone levels, vitamin D levels, that sort of thing. So vitamin levels and just hormone levels, and then the amount of stress, the amount of cortisol that we have in our life and how we're impacting this world can be an impact. And our nutrition, our hydration, and our fat intake is another whole dynamic that impacts brain fog. Another one is chronic fatigue. How is our body and our mind rested? And that can really impact how we are impacted by brain fog. And also depression and the amount of sleep that we get. All of these things are major impacts for how our brain functions, and should be considered when we are really looking at peeling back and understanding how brain fog is actually impacting us. And so my question to you as we come to a close from this video is, what is going on in your life that may be causing the brain fog? And I think that that would be a really interesting question to ponder, to make a list of all the different areas that we talked about. You know, how much stress is going on in my life? Who are the people that are in my life? How are my trauma responses? Am I really triggered these days? Is all of this stress like pouring into my life? What sort of stress am I navigating? You know, is it work? Is it family? Is it finances? You know, what are the levels of stress that are going on in your life? How am I eating? How am I hydrating? How am I sleeping? What is my mood disposition? Am I depressed? Do I have anxiety? And I think that would be a really interesting list to just go down the list and say, hey, I do have, you know, XYZ, and put a check in there. And the more checks that you have, the more impacted your brain is going to be. And so I just wanted to share that there are a lot of contributing factors to brain fog and how we navigate this earth. And there's some that we can do some healthy health and wellness changes and lifestyle changes to make an impact in how our brain and our body and our nervous system are navigating life. And so there are some things that we do have the ability to make changes that would impact and improve and lessen our brain fog. And there's other things, like if we do have PTSD and we already have a hippocampus that's a size smaller, then that's something we can't overcome. Our brain's not going to grow with all of that. We're going to have to learn to have new strategies in place. And, you know, real quickly, I just wanted to talk about like 3 really simple, easy things that we can help ourselves with brain fog. And, you know, one of them is, again, looking at your nutrition and looking at your hydration. Those are 2 really big things that we can help ourselves with. The third one is sleeplessness, like how much sleep are we getting? And really looking at that and making that a priority, because during the middle of the night is when our brain and our body heal. And when we get to REM sleep, that is just amazing for our brain. So looking at, you know, sleep hygiene and different sleep habits that we can do to improve our sleep and so that we can sleep longer is really good. So, and the last thing is I really am a big proponent of video games. I think that in this space for brain fog and helping the brain to have better processing and also just smoother and having more short-term memory, I believe that video games can be a great asset. And there are some great brain applications that are out there. There's Lumosity. There is BeatStar, which is a music application, which kind of gives you hand and eye coordination and brain. Your brain's involved with all of that. I think ballroom dancing is another. You're doing it in partnership and you're using your brain and body are connected and you have hand and eye coordination. And I also think weight training and doing anything like a sport like tennis or pickleball or going for a walk or just all those things where you are in touch with your body and you have that body and brain connection. So, you know, there's reading, doing, in the morning I see a lot of people doing crossword puzzles or Sudoku or anything like that where you're actually physically and mentally training your brain. And so, yeah, there are some things that we can do to help ourselves, and most of them are health and wellness related with lifestyle changes. And so I just wanted to share all that with you today and continue the conversation. We've been having a week of, or a new month of health impacts of different, we had sleeplessness last week, and then this week we're talking about brain fog. So yeah, I just wanted to, open a conversation, and we'll continue the conversation in future videos. And yeah, I just wanted you to remind you also that be your own true love so that you can live happily ever after. And when we are really loving ourselves, and we're living and having compassion for ourselves, and we're speaking our truth, and we're setting boundaries, and we are able to take care of our own needs, and we're advocating for our own needs, we have a different vibe about us. And it really brings in an inner circle that is unlike anything that you've had before. And there seems to be a shift, like when you're doing this level of work and understanding yourself, that you vibe different. So some people are going to vibe out, and new people are going to vibe in. And when you're vibing different, and when you're loving yourself, and when you have better life skills, and you're taking care of yourself, that does give you a different vibe, and that also will attract different romantic partners. So there is a benefit to doing this level of personal development work and understanding yourself and learning new tools and tricks to take you to the next level. But you also need a good inner circle. You need other people that can take you there. And also it'll just attract in new people so that you can advance and have a happier, more joyful life. So again, I've enjoyed this conversation, and I hope you have a really great day today. Take care. Bye-bye.